April 25th, 1945. 20,000 feet above the patchwork fields of southern Germany. The sun glinted off the polished plexiglass canopy of Captain Robert S. Johnson's P-51D Mustang, Lucky. The air up here was thin and cold, the drone of his Packard Merlin engine a familiar, comforting hum. His knuckles, resting lightly on the control stick, were white not from tension, but from the chill. His squadron, the 61st Fighter Squadron of the 56th Fighter Group, flew in a loose combat spread, their eyes endlessly scanning the infinite empty blue. The war was winding down. The Wehrmacht was in full retreat, the front lines a chaotic mess. But the sky, they knew, could still kill you. Then a voice crackled over the VHF radio, sharp and urgent. "Bandits! 10 o'clock high! Jesus, look at them climb!" Johnson's head snapped to the left. High above, a flight of 4 aircraft were clawing their way into the heavens with a rate of climb that made his stomach lurch. They left no dark smears of exhaust, only faint, shimmering heat hazes that distorted the light behind them. They were sleek, shark-like, with pointed noses and wings that swept back at an angle he'd never seen before. Me-262s, the German jet, a creature of rumor and terrifying confirmed fact. "Tally-ho," Johnson said, his voice calm, a stark contrast to the sudden adrenaline flooding his system. He pushed the throttle forward, the Merlin roaring in response, the airframe vibrating with raw power. But he knew it was a futile gesture. The P-51 was one of the finest piston-engine fighters of the war, but against the 262, it was a greyhound trying to catch a bullet. He watched, a helpless spectator, as the jets, accelerating at an impossible rate, began to curve around for a slashing attack. This was their nightmare scenario. You couldn't catch them. You couldn't run from them. You could only hope to dodge and pray. But then, something strange happened. The lead jet, instead of maintaining its blistering speed for another pass, began to slow. It dropped its landing gear, a startlingly white configuration against the drab camouflage of its fuselage. It was going down, not in a fiery plunge, but in a controlled descent. "He's bleeding off speed," his wingman radioed. "He's heading for that airfield." Johnson peered down. There, nestled between a dark stretch of forest and a small village, was a makeshift Luftwaffe airstrip, its runways pockmarked with recent bomb craters. A gamble, a desperate one. The pilot was low on fuel, or perhaps his engines were failing. The complex, newfangled turbojets were notoriously temperamental. Johnson didn't hesitate. "All right, boys," he called, his fighter pilot instincts taking over. "He's going in. Let's make sure he doesn't change his mind. Follow him down, but watch for flak." Nosing the Mustang over, he began a spiraling descent, his eyes locked on the gliding jet. The hunter had become an escort, shepherding a technological prize towards an unplanned and now irrevocable surrender. The ghost was coming to Earth, and they were going to be there to meet it. The Me-262 touched down with a squeal of tires, a strangely graceful sight after the predatory grace of its flight. It rolled out, weaving slightly to avoid the worst of the bomb craters, before finally coming to a stop near a cluster of battered hangars. By the time Johnson and his wingman had completed a low, threatening pass over the field, the German pilot had already climbed out of the cockpit. He stood on the wing root, a lone figure in a black leather jacket, his hands raised, not in a frantic wave, but in a gesture of resigned surrender. The ground crew, what was left of them, had already melted into the surrounding woods. Johnson brought Lucky in on a final, bumpy approach, his prop kicking up dust and debris on the ravaged runway. He taxied to a halt 100 yards from the jet with his .50 caliber guns armed and trained on the silent Schwabe. Killing the engine, the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of hot metal and the whine of his wingman's Mustang circling overhead. Johnson unstrapped, pulled his .45 pistol from his shoulder holster, and dropped to the ground, the earth feeling unsteady beneath his boots. He approached cautiously, his eyes darting between the German pilot and the aircraft itself. Up close, the 262 was even more menacing. The skin was smooth, riveted with a precision that spoke of advanced manufacturing. The swept wings, he now saw, weren't just for show. They were a fundamental rethinking of aerodynamics. The two massive UMO 004 turbojet engines slung under the wings were monstrous things, still radiating a blistering heat that warped the air around them. The German pilot was young, impossibly so, with a tired defiance in his eyes. "It is out of fuel," he said in passable English, nodding toward the aircraft, "and I am out of war." Johnson didn't holster his pistol, but his grip relaxed slightly. His attention was utterly captivated by the machine. He walked around it, a craftsman inspecting a masterwork from a rival guild. He ran a gloved hand over the wing leading edge, feeling the cold, hard metal. He peered into the empty intake, a dark, yawning mouth that gulped air at unbelievable speeds. His crew chief, Sergeant Manny Bristow, had landed in a follow-up plane a few minutes later, and now he was circling the jet like a shark, his mechanic's mind already whirring. "Captain, look at this," Bristow said, his voice hushed with awe. He was pointing at the ordnance. Under each wing were racks of what looked like small, ugly rockets. Intel reports called these R4Ms. One salvo from these, they say it can tear a bomber apart in seconds. Johnson looked from the sophisticated rockets to the bomb craters on the runway, then back to the jet. The contradiction was staggering. Here was a weapon that could fly higher and faster than anything the Allies possessed, yet it was grounded, helpless, because the Reich could not get a few hundred gallons of kerosene to this field. The most advanced fighter in the world, defeated not by a bullet, but by an empty fuel gauge. With the German pilot secured and the airfield perimeter established by a growing number of American troops, Captain Johnson and Sergeant Bristow were given the all-clear to properly inspect the prize. Using the pilot's own instructions, they wrestled with the complex canopy latch until it hissed open on pneumatic struts. The smell that wafted out was a unique cocktail of high-octane aviation fuel, sweat, leather, and ozone, the scent of a new kind of warfare. Johnson hoisted himself up onto the wing and slid into the cockpit. It was a tight, purposeful space, a stark contrast to the relatively roomy office of his P-51. The instrumentation was bewildering. Where his Mustang had a familiar array of round dials, the 262's panel was a dense forest of gauges, many with markings and units he didn't recognize. His eyes were drawn to the engine readouts, turbine RPM, exhaust gas temperature, metrics that were pure science fiction to a piston engine pilot. He rested his hands on the control stick. It was a centrally mounted joystick, not a yoke, and between his knees were the twin throttles for the jets. He pushed one forward slightly in a pantomime of flight, imagining the surge of raw, unadulterated power. "Will you look at this?" Bristow muttered, his head and shoulders deep inside the open portside engine bay, his voice echoing slightly. "The craftsmanship, it's incredible. The turbine blades, the precision. It's like a watchmaker built this." But then his tone shifted. "But Cap, the metals, they're all wrong. Feel this housing." He guided Johnson's hand to a part of the engine casing. "It's not high-grade steel. It's some kind of substitute, probably low nickel or even plain carbon steel. Under this heat, this thing's got a lifespan measured in hours, not hundreds of hours." Johnson leaned back in the pilot's seat, the reality of the situation crystallizing. Bristow continued, his voice a low commentary on the Reich's crumbling foundation. No tungsten, no chromium, no nickel. They're building these miracles out of spare parts and prayers. And the fuel, he tapped a fuel line. These UMO engines, they're supposed to run on a special high-grade kerosene, but from what we've heard, they're thinning it out with anything they can find. Low-grade diesel, even synthetic oil. It gums up the fuel nozzles, cokes up the turbines. It's a wonder this thing even got off the ground. The 262s were being allocated a fraction of what they needed. Most never even made it to the runway. The officer paused, looking at Johnson. You and your men didn't just capture a jet, Captain. You captured a symptom. This is what happens when a nation's strategy is built on bluster and miracle weapons instead of logistics and sound industrial policy. Johnson thought of the young German pilot's words. It was to be a bomber. Hitler's personal interference, his demand for a blitz bomber to sate his desire for retaliatory strikes, had neutered the 262's greatest advantage, its speed as an interceptor. For precious, irreplaceable months, the jet had been misused, allowing Allied bombers to continue their devastating work unmolested by this fearsome new threat. The awe he had felt at the 262's blistering climb and sleek form had now completely curdled into a grim, cold certainty. The Reich was not just losing, it was already dead. It just didn't know it yet. Its body was still moving, but its brain had failed, its arteries were clogged, and its nerves were shot. They had created a weapon from the next decade, but they were trying to fight with the resources and the thinking of the last century. In that captured cockpit, Johnson hadn't just seen an advanced fighter. He had seen the blueprint of a nation's fatal overreach, a terrifying glimpse of what could have been had it been wielded by a sane, resource-rich power. But it wasn't. And in that realization, he knew with every fiber of his being that the war in Europe was truly, irrevocably over.
The initial awe was now tempered by a grim, dawning certainty. This was not just a captured aircraft, it was a diagnostic tool, an autopsy on the German war machine. The genius was undeniable, breathtaking even. But it was a genius hamstrung by catastrophic resource shortages and, as they were about to learn, catastrophic leadership. The young German pilot, under casual questioning, had shrugged with a bitter smile. It was to be a bomber, he said, the words laced with a profound fatigue. The Führer's order, Blitzbomber. We wasted months trying to learn how to aim a bomb going this fast. By the time they let us be fighters again, it was too late. In that moment, sitting in the advanced cockpit, Johnson didn't just see a superior enemy plane. He saw the fatal flaw of the Third Reich, a brilliant weapon built with compromised materials, starved of fuel, and directed by the meddling of a man who understood politics, but not the physics of the sky. Captain Johnson slowly pulled himself out of the Me-262's cockpit, the leather of his flight jacket scraping against the canopy rail. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows from the swept wings, painting the torn-up tarmac in stripes of light and dark. He stood there for a long moment, one hand resting on the cool metal of the fuselage, as if trying to absorb the final, unsettling truth of the machine. Sergeant Bristow wiped his greasy hands on a rag, his face a mask of professional admiration and profound pity. "It's a bloody shame, Cap," Bristow said, his voice low. "A real bloody shame, to build something like this, and then strangle it in the cradle." He kicked lightly at a loose piece of rubble on the ground. "No fuel, junk metal, and some idiot telling them how to fly it. It's like giving a racehorse a plow to pull." Johnson nodded, his gaze sweeping over the airfield. American engineers had already arrived, swarming over the jet with the eager, methodical intensity of ants disassembling a prize. They were measuring, photographing, and carefully tagging components. The German pilot, now under guard by a pair of stone-faced GIs, watched the proceedings with an air of detached resignation. He had offered no resistance, only the weary confession that had sealed the narrative for Johnson. "Let's get this beauty crated up," Johnson ordered, his voice hoarse. "Intel is going to have a field day, and get a message to group. Tell them we have a special delivery, code word paperclip. The name was a new classification for high-value German scientific and technological prizes, items to be seized, studied, and taken back to the States. As he walked away from the 262, the image of his own P-51, Lucky, came into view. It sat 100 yards away, looking almost archaic in comparison. The propeller, the radial engine, the straightforward lines, it was the pinnacle of a dying age. The Mustang had won the war of attrition, of production, of reliability. It could fly from England to Berlin and back, a testament to Allied logistical might. The 262 could barely make it from one cratered German airfield to the next. The contrast was the entire war in microcosm. That night, in a makeshift command post set up in a battered farmhouse on the edge of the airfield, Johnson sat with a mug of lukewarm coffee, the events of the day replaying in his mind. A technical officer from Army Air Force's intelligence laid out preliminary findings on a map-strewn table. "Preliminary analysis confirms your on-site assessment, Captain," the officer said, tapping a report. "The metallurgy is subpar, leading to critically short engine life. Our estimates suggest they were getting maybe 10 to 25 hours out of these Jumo engines before they needed a complete overhaul. We have Mustang engines back at base with over 300 hours on them." He pushed another document forward. "And the fuel situation is worse than we thought. Their entire synthetic fuel program is in ruins.